That's often our caregivers are very important and go through a lot of stress, sometimes not quite seen in a lot of ways. So, well, today, hopefully everybody received our Bible study as Joyce joins us too. We're going to enter into our Bible study by beginning with a question. We'll see Joyce there. There she is. Does anyone beside you have a key to your house? What made you decide to give them a key? And why wouldn't you decide to give a neighbor or a friend a key to your house?
Well, if nobody wants to say anything, I already checked with Chris if he can't remember, but I'm sure I gave you a key to my house. And I did that because I gave both of my boys keys to my house because I trust them and didn't know my neighbors. And I'm not sure that I still know them well enough to want them to have my key, but he also knows where one's hidden. So that's always helpful. But it's in trust in case I croak and nobody knows and days go by and nobody hears from me.
Yeah, my kids have keys simply because they lived here. And it's not like, oh yeah, you graduated from college, give me the key back because you're moving away.
That'd be a pretty abrupt good luck on your journey. No, give it back. No, Rick, you'd be much more passive. We would just change the locks. You didn't have to take the key back. So
our house is unique in the church, and maybe a lot of church members have keys. But I kind of feel like our house is different in that case. And I don't really care if any church people want to come in and, do anything that might need fixed or whatever. So, and also I feel like when we're not home, then our house is being watched over. So they're like our neighbors, none of the real neighbors. Like I Love Books or the coffee shop have our keys.
I don't have a key. Well, I don't have a key to my parents' house, but I remember they gave me the garage code. So that was like a way for them to have me, like, if I need to get in, I know how to get in, but I don't have a key to their place.
Climbing through the window doesn't count.
Yeah. If my parents were in trouble, I would bust through a window. Hey, like I would, no door would stop me.
My last church, it was said of the church that more people in the neighborhood had keys than didn't, because so many people had used the church for this thing or that over the years, and they had just kept giving copies of keys out and never really got them back. So at one point they did just change the locks because they felt that it had become a security issue, and we were going to have a preschool move in, and we just didn't know who all had keys over the years. The church had been there over 100 years, and families had passed down keys, and so we redid it because we didn't trust that we knew who had the keys and that they had good intent. And so we reestablished a very secure kind of key system, as secure as one can be anyway, with numbered keys and assigned keys to different consistory members and that kind of thing. So with that church, if you went on consistory, you automatically got a key to the building, which I'm not sure every consistory member would really like that responsibility in many churches. That was the case there, though. So
when I was a substitute organist for about 40 years, churches got tired of working out who would meet me during the week to practice. And so eventually 5 churches, I had a keychain with 5 church keys on it, where I played enough that they didn't want to think about who's coming to the church to let me in. And they trusted me. And it's kind of funny because one of the churches was having problems and they changed the locks. And they came to me and said, this is a new key. We had to change the locks. And I said, how do you know it wasn't me? And they said, well, we have to let you in because you practice all the time. So we assume we trust you.
Ginny was like one of those building managers who has a key to every room on the clip there. So that's
and
funny.
The funny thing is that a lot of people in our church don't know. Amazingly, nobody ever changed the lock to the door of our church that's on the parsonage side. And I still have my key from when I was in my 30s, when I practiced the organ there night or day whenever I wanted. And it still is the same lock.
Those blue doors right by the speed bump. Yeah, we haven't changed the locks on that one in ages. That's funny.
Never changed that one.
Well, we all know, obviously, the use of keys. You don't have to be more than 5 or 6 years old. I mean, my son he got really interested in locks and keys when he was about 2, because he saw how they open things up and all of those things. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today as it applies to much greater kind of picture of things. So
Luke was the steward of keys. When he was 2, he carried around keys that weighed more than he did.
He was like Ginny Hayes. Yeah, he had more keys than you could count. Luke had things he didn't even know what they were for. But yes, he loved having a big, huge clip of keys. Still has keys placed strategically all over the house in different places. For what reasons, we're not sure. But he could always reach a key if he needs one for whatever reason. But we've been looking at O Come, Emmanuel, which is a great Advent hymn. And as you probably know by now, it has a number of verses, traditionally 7, and each one refers to a different understanding of who Jesus is by a different title. So we've looked at wisdom as a name for Jesus. We've looked at the stump of Jesse, or branch of Jesse. And now we look at the key of David today. So we'll look at the key of David, what that title means, and we'll examine from whence it comes in Scripture. So we're going to turn first to the first kind of major part of this. And I'll just mention as we start in the Bible study, I do try and read a lot of scholarship about these things to try and get a lot of detail and background things, some that we never use, but just some of that. And in my original questions, the scholarship I had read at the time led me to believe one thing, and I now believe something different about one of the characters we're going to read about. So I'll get to that, and we'll just ignore that conclusion I came to that somebody was maybe not a real person. The majority of scholarship I've read says that both of the people we're going to read about were historic folks in the history of God's people. So we're going to turn to Isaiah chapter 22, and we're going to read verses 12 through 19 to begin. And this is really important passage about keys, to be honest, and what they represented and what their real use was way back when. So would somebody be willing to read Isaiah chapter 22, verse 12 through 19 for us?
Sure.
Thank you, Rick.
The Lord Almighty, called you on that day to weep and to wail, to tear out your hair and put on sackcloth. But see, there is joy and revelry, slaughtering of cattle and killing of sheep, eating of meat and drinking of wine. Let us eat and drink, you say, for tomorrow we die. The Lord Almighty has revealed this in my hearing. Till your dying day, this sin will not be atoned. For, says the Lord Almighty, this is what the Lord the Almighty says. Go, say to this steward, to Shebna, who is in charge of the palace, what are you doing here, and who gave you permission to cut out a grave for yourself here, hewing your grave on the height and chiseling your resting place in the rock? Beware, the Lord is about to take firm hold of you and hurl you away, O you mighty man. He will roll you up tightly like a ball and throw you into a large country. There you will die, and there your splendid chariots will remain, you disgrace to your master's house. I will depose you from your office, and you will be ousted from your position.
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
A pleasant prophecy, as so many are. From the Lord's perspective, what should the people be doing at this time in their history, and what are they doing? What do you get the sense that's coming when you read that first part?
Since they're having a big party when they shouldn't be.
There's this image about, let's feast today for tomorrow we die. It sounds like they're preparing for war, but in a celebratory kind of way. And God does not want them to be celebrating right now. God wants them to be focused and atoning almost. And whether it's war or a day of judgment, that could be another reading that the people are celebrating before the end. God's not really happy with that perspective on things. Right? So who is Shebna?
I try to get a picture of this, of them, sitting around the campfire telling this story, because it's not a fun story, but it might be one when things are kind of going bad. They're just reminded, and the elders in the group might just say, well, let's just review this, or start telling this story to get them sort of back into shape again.
So who is Shebna, and what would his position entail? So in your Bible, I think, Rick, your reading said a steward?
Steward, yes.
Yep.
Says he's in charge of all the king's affairs.
Kind of a number 2 person.
Yes. So these are good understandings and insights. So Jenny has the message. That's a good helpful insight there. But the steward who is in charge of all the king's affairs, you might call it the prime minister today. The second in command, that kind of thing, or the chief of staff, however you want to point that. But yes, Shebna is in a very important position. Sorry, Joyce?
Yeah, mine says that he's the palace administrator.
Palace administrator is a good understanding if you know what that means. But today we might just think, oh, he's in charge of the parties, or something like, no, like he's in charge of all the affairs of the palace and the king. So yes, palace administrator is accurate as long as we know that means really important person. So some scholars point to Joseph, he of the Technicolor Dreamcoat, his role in Egypt and with Pharaoh. He was the Pharaoh's administrator. He was the Pharaoh's steward. He rose to that rank, meaning second in command in all of the, not in the army, but in all of the functions of the kingdom or the empire. Right. Is Shebna a good example of the office or a bad one? And what evidence does there seem to be for the conclusion?
Seems to say that as an outsider, he's taking an awful lot of big, fancy control of things.
So there's there's a question. My translation in verse 16 says, what right do you have here? Who are your relatives here? And it seems to infer that Shebna is not a native of the area, but is a foreigner who's risen to the rank. That's one way to look at it. There's another way to look at it too, but either way, he's doing some things that the steward maybe shouldn't be doing. What's the very real example that's given here?
Kind of picking a prime spot for his grave.
Doesn't exactly sound like something we would do to enrich ourselves today, but that was a big deal. Why would somebody pick a big prime spot and make a big tomb for themselves?
They think they're important or should be worshipped or something when they die.
Not only do they want to be important now, they want to be remembered as important later. Mm-hmm. Right? If you're the emperor or the king, you're allowed to do that. If you're the steward, that's overstepping your bounds. You don't go carving yourself a big tomb. Somebody can do that for you. You can't do it for yourself. So he's a little too big for his britches here. He's overstepping his authority. So what will be the reward or punishment for Shebna?
Going to get rolled up like a snowball and thrown into another country.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Now, look at it, like the snow outside.
Yeah, the images that I have of one of those roly-poly bugs, you know, that roll up. I don't know if you ever saw those when you were a little kid. You touch them and they roll into a ball. It's like picking one of those up, having it go into a ball and just flicking it away. Like he's just going to be thrown far from here.
I like this. I like this description. God will grab you by the hair, swing you round and round dizzyingly, and then let go, sailing through the air like a ball until you're out of sight.
Now mine says, he will wad you up in his hands like a ball and toss you away into a distant barren land where you will die.
Yeah, so both of ours have the idea that part of this cast is casting him out of there.
So not only is the grave a bad idea because it's overstepping your bounds, but you're assuming you get to rest peacefully here forever and ever. And you're going to die in a foreign land where nobody even knows you, is kind of the prophecy that's going to happen. So we're not really sure if Shebna was a foreigner who tried to exert his influence here, or if the prophecy is saying, because we know at the time there's this problem. Shebna's around the time of King Hezekiah, who's the son of King Ahaz. Good king. Ahaz, bad king last week. Hezekiah, good king. And the Assyrians are a rival power, and they're trying to take over Israel and at least create a puppet state. And the idea is that Hezekiah is against it. Hezekiah will resist this because God does not want allies with foreign powers. But Shebna might be trying to make an alliance on the side with Assyria so he can stay in power as the new governor and kind of be the number one in charge. And basically God's saying, yeah, you're not going to be buried where anybody's going to remember you. You want to be remembered? Nobody's going to remember you where you end up buried. And we have the first example of a collector of automobiles in this passage. It's easy to miss, but
is that like baseball in the Genesis 1 in the beginning?
So bad.
He's gonna get whirled round and round and thrown like a ball into a foreign land. There you shall die, and there your splendid chariots shall lie. So it sounds like Shebna was a collector of splendid chariots. He apparently not only dug for himself a nice tomb, but he drove the fanciest autos of the day. And it sounds like, you know, a lot of good that'll do you. When, you know, you can have all your fancy chariots with you when you die and nobody will remember you or how fancy your chariots were. So there. So Shebna, not exactly the best example of a good steward. So now we're going to read the next following passages up through verse 25. Now, in my study, I write, we think Shebna was a real person, but we don't know about Eliakim. We think Eliakim was a real person too. There's references both in Isaiah and 2 Kings of both of these people. In 2 Kings, we have a reference of where the king of Assyria sends messengers to negotiate kind of a takeover. And Eliakim is the steward, along with Shebna as a scribe who used to be the steward. So we see a switching. Shebna falls out of power, and Eliakim is going to succeed him as the chief steward. So I will read chapter 22, verses 20 through 25. On that day, I will call my servant Eliakim, son of Hilkiah, and will clothe him with your robe and bind your sash on him. I will commit your authority to his hand, and he shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open and no one shall shut. He shall shut and no one shall open. I will fasten him like a peg in a secure place, and he will become the throne of honor to his ancestral house. And they will hang on him the whole weight of his ancestral house, the offspring and issue, every small vessel from the cups to all the flagons. On that day, says the Lord of hosts, the peg that was fastened in a secure place will give way. It will be cut down and fall, and the load that was on it will perish, for the Lord has spoken. We'll get to that last verse. It's a little tricky to understand how that all fits in. But if Eliakim is real, what's he going to do?
It sounds like he's going to take over as the second in command and do so in a righteous way.
And so whether we think he's real, but even more, we think that he has, that he stands for something more broadly. So what qualities does this person more broadly, what will they be invested with when they become this office of the steward? What things do they get?
A robe, and do you mean literal things? A robe and a sash?
A robe and a belt or a sash. These are symbols of authority. The robe, for many, we have it in the secular world where judges wear a robe, but ministers wear robes and have for years. This is a symbol of vestment of some sort of righteous thing or religious practice, part of it. The belt is a symbol of authority there. We don't usually think of that today as a symbol of authority, but it was then. And
well, I think different traditions have ways of showing that. I know when I became a yoga instructor, we were given white sashes, and this was in India, and it was a religious ceremony for us to be given over our heads. The authority was placed with this white sash, and then we practiced with those on.
And you can see that today still, in the real kind of cheesy way. Sometimes competition winners have a sash of some sort, but you also see it in when oftentimes when kids are confirmed, you see it had been, and still true today, or a deacon or elder might have some sort of a sash, that kind of thing too. And there's one other really important thing that he gets.
He will be given a seat of honor in his father's house.
So that's a position of power. So we think that he's somehow related into the royal line.
He gets a key.
The
key of the Davidic heritage. Then they're talking about something, if this is ahead, just say wait till later, but it's talking about a couple lines later. I'll pound him like a nail into a solid wall. He'll secure the Davidic tradition. Everything will hang on him. And then the day will come when the nail will come loose and fall out. So something happens to this replacement person also.
So we're going to talk about that because that's a little tricky, that last part. But up until then, you got it right, Jenny. He's gonna be the key. He gets the key to the Davidic line, as the messenger says, the message rather, translation says. That's accurate. So he can open the doors of what this royal household is supposed to do. But in a very literal sense, the steward got the keys to the palace and was able to admit people or deny people entrance, which is a really important function, because if the steward is allying with enemies, they can let the bad guys in. Whereas the steward is protecting the kingdom and the line, they will not let those people in. So there's a very real function, but in the much grander scheme too, if you have the keys to the kingdom, you have the power to let people in and keep people out. So that's also a really important function in a more cosmic or divine sense. Now that last part, those verse 24 and 25, 24 seems really helpful to understand. This person is like, so in those days, unlike today, when we go to hang a picture, we put a nail in the wall or some sort of bracket or something. if you build a house out of bricks or that kind of thing, you can't just do that. In those days, if they tried to put a little nail in the wall, the mortar would crumble. So what they did is they built like iron rods with a hook into the mortar, so that when they built the wall, there were places to hang things like cooking utensils or robes or that. So those hangers were like basically cemented into the wall. They were really firm. And so this Eliakim is going to be like one of those hooks in the wall. You could hang the whole line on him. All the authority, all the stuff, everything, all the descendants will hang on him like this really firm hook. It's like one of those, if you've seen those, they make these new kind of hooks that you put in the wall that hook into your sheetrock, and they can, just a little hook can support 50 pounds or something like that. This is like one of the firmest hooks you can have. But there's going to be a day where a peg comes loose and everything crumbles. Now, this is a really tricky part, verse 25, if your Bible has verses. And there's two different opinions on this. One is that it continues to reference the fall of Shebna. So just like Eliakim is going to be a firm hook, Shebna is the one who's the post that comes out of the wall and comes loose. That makes a lot of sense. Two is that even Eliakim, for all his faithfulness and worthiness, one day his time as steward will end. And it's not a judgment. It's just he's human. And human beings have a limited reign. So we're not quite sure what that refers to, but either way, it tells us that even the best of circumstances, it's all temporary, because his reign as steward, his time as the chief steward, it's going to end. Even if he's great, it's going to come to an end at some point. So
some point in time, he's going to die and just not be here. If nothing else.
So he'll be cut down. Well, yeah, this isn't for Eliakim. It's not necessarily, and even Eliakim's going to turn bad and get tossed away. That's not the point. The point is that even the good kings, even the good rulers, even the good stewards, they still are going to die at some point. They're not going to be here.
That's what this seems to be inferring, what you're saying, Chris. It says that the nail, it's not that the nail is going to be jammed or pulled out of the wall. It says the nail will come loose and fall out, break loose from that solid wall. In other words, it doesn't sound like a violent act. It sounds like
everybody's time comes, that kind of thing. So that's so this person, the first person to be vested with the keys of the house of David, even though Shebna in theory has them, we hear it about Eliakim, the good person, having that, where he can open the doors and close the doors to people coming and going. Even his time is going to come to an end. Yes.
Even think it's an illustration of how things just wear away. When I watched how they made cement in India, it was astounding to me that they put houses together with that, and then they would walk on the roof. We were in hotels where they had done that, and it was scary after we saw it. Was just sort of throwing a little water, a little this and that, and that was it. And it's like we learn better techniques. We learn more. Rulers learn more by having observed both good and bad. So by the time we've arrived at this point in history, there's a lot to have learned from history. We're not done yet.
And yet it's still temporal. No matter how good it's still temporal. No matter how good your building techniques are, it doesn't last forever, right? So we're going to move on now.
Oh,
sorry, Joyce?
Well, I was just going to say, isn't that how it is in life? You could have vibrant, strong, wonderful people, but as they age, you may respect them for their wisdom, but they tend to fade out. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It happens with people, it happens with organizations. You just think of the Rotary Club in a certain town was once the center of it all. It was where things were moved and shaped and how the town was driven. And now it's something that you know, the business people kind of join as a perfunctory thing that's an obligation, like, we should join it. I'm not saying anything about Rotary. I'm just saying that there's organizations and different places and different times that are really important. And then they kind of lose their importance because other people come up and take the, you know, what they did really well. Somebody else is doing that now. You know, it used to
become restaurants.
Years ago, the church was the place that built hospitals and schools. And a lot of governments around the world have taken that over now. So the church used to be the one who healed and educated in a very real way. And that's a civic duty now, not just a religious one. There's still a lot of religious schools and hospitals, but, you know, they're not the forefront of that anymore. So,
well, even with people, when I look at the news and I see the ICU nurses, and that's what I did for a living, and I faded away. I'm fading away. I mean, I don't know that it makes me feel like I would like to do that again, but I know that I can't. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's with everything.
Yep.
But your heart remains with it, and your understanding remains with it.
So we're going to move to Revelation now, last book of the Bible. And one of the most interesting parts of Revelation to me, and Mr. Bird has led us study on Revelation, so he's an expert on the whole book. So if we have any questions, we can just ask him.
Okay.
Hi.
We're gonna look to Revelation chapter 3. And here in Revelation, so a little background on Revelation, just in case you don't know, Revelation is John, who's exiled to Patmos. We think he writes somewhere between the year 80 and the year 100. We think that he was a very young follower of Jesus and that he's very advanced in age. And he's out kind of in modern day Turkey, an island off there, and he has this vision. And it's revealed to him, a revelation of the end times and what's to come. Now, before we get into it, I just want to share something with you. So if you look at your screen, you will see there are 7 churches that are mentioned in Revelation. Part of Revelation, there's the Lord offers John, he wants John to write letters to 7 different churches. And if you see on the map, which you should be able to see on your screen right now, these 7 churches include the one we're going to read about, which is Philadelphia, which we know the city of Philadelphia here in the States. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Philadelphia in ancient Asia Minor or modern day Turkey. And if you can see on this map, sometimes people say the 7 cities do look like a crown, which is interesting. But also Philadelphia is the easternmost of the cities, if you notice that. And Philadelphia in its day, it had been founded by the kingdom of Pergamum, which is also another city, which is further northwest of Philadelphia. And it was a rather young city of the 7 cities. And Philadelphia's job, because it was at the end of the Greek area and toward the Persian area of the world. And so Philadelphia became the gateway for Greek ideas. So its purpose was to be kind of the missionary city and spread Greek thinking and language to Asia. And it actually fulfilled that function really well because its surrounding areas within 200 years of its founding spoke Greek instead of Persian and took on Greek culture. And so it was kind of a trading hub where it was like the gateway to the East, but it was also a place that definitely gave out the culture. It was kind of a cultural, a scout for the culture. It kind of went out to other culture and spread the Greek culture. Something about Philadelphia also, it was at the epicenter of a lot of earthquakes. So around the year 17, the city of Sardis was leveled by an earthquake. Philadelphia suffered terrible damage. And while Sardis recovered, Philadelphia felt tremors for years. And people actually left the city and moved to the countryside because they were so afraid, according to historians, of buildings crumbling in the aftershocks for years later. So the city of Philadelphia was depopulated, and it almost became populated around the city in the agricultural area rather than in the city, because it was just dangerous to live there because of the aftershocks of an earthquake. So Philadelphia is a gateway city for Greek culture to be spread. And it also, at some point in its history, has become kind of a dangerous place to live because of the earthquakes and aftershocks. So those are two things that are interesting to read in context as we read what's coming next. Okay. Would somebody be willing to read Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13?
I can read that.
Thank you, Marcy.
And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Look, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but are lying. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word of patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. How far do I go? I'm sorry.
To 13.
To 13. Okay, great. I am coming soon. Hold fast to what you have so that no one may seize your crown. If you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God. You will never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
From the opening verses, is the church at Philadelphia going to find reward or punishment in the future?
Sounds like mostly a reward.
What are some things that the church is going to, maybe we understand some adversity that it's facing now. What are is the adversity it seems to be facing, and what's going to happen in the future?
Sounds like they have people who are a part of the synagogue of Satan worshiping, and that might be some adversity, but then what will happen is that they will come and bow down before the feet of God.
So the synagogue of Satan thing is pretty harsh language. It repeats something that another church is finding too. Smyrna, I think, is also same kind of thing, which basically we take to mean that. So does it seem like this church is a big church and a powerful church, or a small one?
I tend to think it's a pretty big one.
So I know that you have, this is verse 8, I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Some of the other cities, the churches are pretty well established. Ephesus, that kind of area, these are big churches. Paul's missionary journeys have kind of been around this area, big churches. We think Philadelphia was kind of just a small church.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't very prestigious, but it soldiered on. That it just remained true to the course, and it wasn't looking for prestige. It just continued to be what it was. And it seems like they're getting persecuted by others for being Christian, and maybe by the Jewish mainstay, which we don't know that Philadelphia had a huge Jewish population, but maybe just in general, they're kind of being put down for their beliefs and called heretics, maybe that kind of thing. But Philadelphia seems to be a small but faithful band here, right? And it seems like it's just been a kind of tricky thing. Now, what is it that they're promised? Think back to the passage we just studied in Isaiah. What is it that they're promised? That, as a note, of the 7 letters, every one of the churches has a punishment coming because of something they're doing, except for Philadelphia. Philadelphia is the only letter that is all positive. They do not have any punishment coming. So they are the most faithful example of the 7 churches in a lot of ways, even though they might be the least significant of their day and age.
Well, you mentioned before in Isaiah 22, this idea of like the hooks being in it. In the Church of Philadelphia, it looks like they're going to be made a pillar and you'll never go out of it.
And the whole
also, if you're in a place that has a lot of earthquakes, being set up as a pillar that's going to stand is kind of an interesting image that you're never going to have to leave again. You'll be exactly where you need to be. You're going to be steadfast and a support for all the people around you, right?
Well, and all those, the thought of, and the last shall be first and the first shall be last, comes to mind because so many people start thinking, like we have the 2nd largest yeshiva in the world here in Lakewood. And there's a new one popping up every mile and a half, and wood's being cut down to do it because they all want to be bigger, better, bigger, better. And there's a point at which you wonder where the source is for all of that.
So that happens throughout the Christian world. Everybody wants to do things better than the other church. You know, the model for church planting is find out what your neighbors aren't offering and do it, you know, bigger and better in your town. But Philadelphia, they're going to be honored in a certain way. Now, I know the study of Isaiah 22 was a long time ago, but what is it that we just talked about was a big honor for Eliakim?
Yeah, the key, holds the key of David.
Key of David. But unlike the very real palace administrator who actually got a key, this is far more significant. So if we think of Philadelphia and what I just mentioned, historically, they're known as kind of a gateway for Greek culture to be spread. If they're the ones to have the key of David, they take on a new role, not as Greek culture to spread, but as to how to spread the true Christian faith. They get to open doors for other people. They get to show people the way to the kingdom. And it's through this faithfulness that doesn't care about gaudy tombs or fancy chariots or being the biggest or the best. It's being faithful to what you are. And they get to have they're going to be the hook. They're going to be the key of David. They're going to be the ones to keep things. They get to open and shut things. It refers to Peter in the New Testament when Jesus gives him the keys to the kingdom. And, his authority, that's where the idea of the Pope comes for us. We think of it as the modern day church, that we have the authority to open the kingdom to people. And Philadelphia is what we have to strive for, this small and faithful group who's not concerned with being bigger and better, but who's concerned just with what they are. And their reward is going to be great, right? So verse 10 tells them something that's going to be the reward. What does verse 10 seem to tell us that their reward is?
Going to be kept from the hour of trial.
So a lot of people have read this verse and have developed a whole theology about it, that true Christians will be raptured before the judgment. But we think that it just means that they're going to be protected through trial. So that it's a very real understanding of what it means to be faithful, is that in the midst of it all, we will still have God's strength in it. Not that we get taken away from the trial, but that we're protected through the trial, if that makes sense. So that's an alternate reading to those who read into it a rapture of Christians from the time of trial. But this is one of the verses where that theology comes from, to be totally frank. This is where a biblical basis for that is. Okay. And one other little historical note, just because it's fun, it's interesting to me. The city of Philadelphia, after their big earthquakes, the emperor relieved taxes for 5 years from them and even contributed to the rebuilding of the city. And so for a time, they renamed their city the new city of Caesar after the emperor. And a few decades later, another emperor was really nice to them, Flavius. So they renamed their city Flavia for a while. So that was the house of Flavius, which is like odd. We don't think of cities renaming themselves for a time, but they did it to honor their emperors and the people who showed them kindness and support. And so here we have, which is a detail would be lost to history if you didn't know that part about ancient Philadelphia. I'll make a pillar in the temple of my God. You'll never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down out of the God from out of heaven, and my own new name. They're going to get renamed again, but this time it's not going to be in honor of an emperor. They're going to get to be named in honor of God. So that's an awesome new name that they're going to have recreated for them. So this is such a promising prophecy and revealing of what the keys of David really are, not just to the palace, but to the whole kingdom of God and what that means. Protection from a time of trial, renamed according to the name of God, and a very real, there's this idea, the synagogue of Satan and all that stuff, the idea that the people who were once your enemies are going to come and bow before you, which it used to be the opposite in the time of Isaiah. The Gentiles were going to come and bow before the Jews. And now it's the new Christians, their enemies are going to bow before them, which is usually the people who are calling them heretics, that kind of thing. So everything has been flipped on its head. And Philadelphia becomes the model for what we're looking at, what the keys to the kingdom, the keys of David really are, is opening the door to this eternal promise, which is pretty fantastic.
Almost like the story of Joseph and the dream he had of the sheaves and his brothers bowing down to him at some point in time.
He was all of a sudden going to become the ruler that was once ruled, right? Yeah, absolutely. So Joseph of the Old Testament, again, he of many colors, the coat, rather than the father of Jesus. So yes, absolutely, Rick. This kind of flipping on its head of authority, right? So the last questions I have are questions of reflection. Usually this is what I leave you with, but I'd appreciate any comments that you have as we conclude today. So in Matthew chapter 16, verse 19, that's the third place in the Bible we hear about the keys of David. So Peter receives the keys to the kingdom of heaven in that verse. And we interpret that as Peter standing for the church. And we are entrusted with the role of steward. It's just like Eliakim was the chief steward of the palace, and Philadelphia becomes the steward of what should be for the future. They're going to become the chief stewards of this revelation. If the church is the steward to the faith, so the worldwide church, what do you think? What are some of the things that distract the church from its role as steward? What ways do you see the church fulfilling its role faithfully? And what's one way the church could do a better job with the keys to the kingdom? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? What are some things that distract the church from its role as steward? What are ways the church does serve in its role faithfully? And what's one thing that the church could do to change? I'm not necessarily talking about Delmar Reformed Church. I'm talking about the church around the world.
It seems important that we not act just as our individual selves, but that we work together so that we are the church, because otherwise there will be fighting among the ranks as to who's more important and whose idea should come first. We have to coordinate between us and work together.
So I appreciate that comment, because you can take that on a very local level. Within the church, we have to make sure that we're in one accord and that we're not fighting if we're going to offer a true message or a true witness to the community. But in the broader church, if the church is concerned with infighting between Christians, how can we ever offer any kind of message or witness to the world around us if we're consumed with challenging one another for authority? So absolutely, that answer satisfies so many levels of how we operate.
But another distraction is just recognizing the fact that the church is made up a bunch of individual people who they themselves are distracted by everything that's going on in their individual lives and their families and their work. I mean, we hear so many people saying, well, I can't come to church because my kid's got a soccer game on Sunday morning. You know, just life of the world that seems to want to draw us away from church itself.
And Rick, you know, that rings so true too. So many of us dream for a bigger house. And then when we get to church, we dream of a bigger church, you know, and we're always pursuing the bigger and better. It's like we want to build a big tomb as a monument to ourselves so that people will remember how great we were. And, you know, my kid's going to be a soccer star, and that's how I'm going to be remembered, as the father of the best soccer player in the world. Like, yeah, you know, I'll be happy if my kid becomes a local electrician, because we need more of those. Yeah.
I'm reminded, Chris, of a lady that I met when I first moved to Cleveland when I was out of college, and I was working in a community ministry in addition to teaching. And I met this elderly lady who was probably my age, and her aphorism, I mean, she had little sayings taped to every part of her kitchen, but she kept saying, this too shall pass, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And in our conversations, even, she would integrate, this too shall pass. And it's true, this too shall pass. And we'll get through the difficult times and the good times, but this too shall pass. And
but it's interesting to think that the height of our power will also pass. Even Eliakim will eventually, his peg will come out of the wall and somebody will succeed him. And so to offer a true witness, our model is the Church of Philadelphia, a small but faithful group who continues to stand firm. You know, and that's an interesting perspective, is that it's not the biggest and best, but just this little city of Philadelphia, the church there, they're the ones, not the most prestigious, not the richest. They're just the ones who are faithful and continue it on. And so when we think about what the key of David really means, it's not about prestige. It's not about power, but it's about opening the door in such a way that reveals what's truly important and what's truly here. So I think that I'll just offer this as a kind of concluding thought. In the RCA, we have a history of mission that has been challenged and a little bit changed lately. But our history of mission is to go around the world and not establish new churches, but to serve the people who are there. So we have missionaries in Oman right now, which is a Muslim country, and we are welcomed there because when we first went there, we served all the lepers who were outside the palace walls. And that's all we did. And we established schools and hospitals. And the people of Oman said, these Christians, they seem to be pretty decent folks, and they're really helping. So we're going to keep them around, to the point that the rulers of Oman established places of honor for Christian missionaries from the Reformed Church in America so that they stayed there. One missionary who retired after a number of decades there was given an estate by the Sultan. That kind of thing doesn't often happen. But when you do it right, when you go there and your intentions are real and people see what you're trying to do, you know, that hymn that some people love and some people hate, but they'll know we are Christians by our love, you know, that everybody sang in the 60s and 70s. There's something to that. That's how mission stands the test of time. People will talk about those missionaries who came and worked to serve. And the people who are concerned with converting the whole town and moving on, yeah, sometimes that sticks. Sometimes it doesn't. In mission, oftentimes it's proven that it doesn't. But when they need to see what the method is behind what you're doing, why are you doing what you're doing? Share the message that way. That's a pretty powerful message. That's a faithful and a small message that can be really long lasting, that can have powerful consequences down the road. So I hope that we would all live our lives to think about that kind of thing. Our church, I would love to see all of our churches directed more towards the eternal and less towards fancy chariots and big tombs that Shebna warns us against there. So I appreciate all of you, and you're joining us for our Bible study today. And I think next week we'll have Bible study again, and then we'll be on hiatus for a little while, going into the Christmas Eve time and that. But next week we'll be looking at Christ as O Dayspring. So O come, Emmanuel. The title we'll be looking at will be Dayspring. So we look forward to that next week, and hope you can join us for worship on Sunday. And thanks for your comments and your insight today. So take care, everybody. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you.